Thank you for joining me on the Southern Report and for blessing me with your time. As you know, it's been a little bit quiet on the podcast front. That's because I have been on my travels again, having spent quite a long period of time in the US, but I've been back for a good few weeks. And as always, it's a real privilege when you then come across yet another wonderful and interesting person to interview about a very, very important subject. There have been many, many podcasts, discussions of late in regard to satanic ritual abuse, and historically, the word satanic panic and where that fitted in within the United States. So there is no better person to bring on than Dr. Mary Jo so we can discuss this. Mary Jo, first of all, thank you so much for joining me. It's much appreciated. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you, Mark, for inviting me to come on to talk about this particular subject that's very dear to my heart.
Well, that is a good place to then start, Mary Jo, because I know you're going to bring a very, very important definition. But why is this subject very, very close to your heart?
It is a journey that the Lord has taken me on for, I would say, close to 30 years now, maybe a little over than that. It started back in the mid 80s, with an organization that I was involved in, uh, where we were helping youth in need get out of organizations, out of cults, and eventually out of the occult, where they were practicing witchcraft and Satanism, and finding safe homes for these kids. So it started a long time ago, and also just the fact of quite a few of my clients. I've worked with over 300 survivors in the United States that have been satanically ritually abused, and as far as local groups as well as governmental groups. So, and every one of them, I just have walked alongside of them and just carried that with them, and to watch the healing and transformation, it just amazes me what God can do.
Mary Jo, before we pull up this very important definition, you mentioned local groups, you mentioned government groups. What do you mean by government groups?
Well, there are groups of people within the government, within um, legislation, within like the judicial and police, that are involved. I'm not saying everybody is, okay, but I know for a fact that quite a few people are. In fact, a case that I'm working on now, that eventually it will probably go public, that a lot of law enforcement was involved in her trafficking.
We It's really interesting because as this subject has suddenly come back, hasn't it? It's come back in regard to podcasts. It's come back, I think, within the non-mainstream news, and people are talking about this. Mary Jo, why do you think suddenly we are looking at this subject again? Even though I say it respectfully, it's a subject that you have been involved with for 30 plus years. But why are people suddenly looking at this again? Why is this coming to the fore?
I think with a lot of the music industry, they're flaunting Satanism and the occult, and on stage doing hand gestures, which are signaling summoning rituals and stuff like that. I mean, and the fact that people have moved away from God or Jesus Christ. They're looking for something, and the enemy is right there that's going to fulfill that by enticing the youth and or adults into this kind of a lifestyle. I'm not saying everybody that listens to this kind of music or like some of these rock stars and that is going to succumb to this. But there are some that are going to be influenced. And especially what concerns me are the younger generation that are so heavily influenced with transing, with a lot of different lifestyles. They're heavily influenced into magic, and that kind of thing.
How much, I mean, the observation that I'm sure that you can make over the last 30, 35, 40 years, the change in American society in regard to this. Can you pinpoint any particular sort of events that happened in American society that changed it in a particular direction? And also, how is the church addressing this and sounding the alarm on this?
The church, quite frankly, is not. There are a few, and I was fortunate to be in a church, partially on staff, that the pastor supported this. He had excuse me, had gotten involved, had a person come to church there that had him left a coven, and he was helping her, and he had some contracts taken out on her. On himself. So he believed all this was real, because I had one client of mine that needed to have a safe place to grow spiritually and to feel safe. And so she started attending, and he and the elders were fantastic as far as supporting her. Anytime she would get triggered, they would help her and not judge her. We had spiritual warfare conferences. We were educating a lot of people in churches and stuff like that about Satanism and about the occult and the strong influence that it's having with the youth. It's always had strong influence with the youth.
You use the word trigger. Could you define what you mean by that?
Yes, there's when somebody has had a traumatic experience, there are things like a sight, smell, sounds, different colors that can trigger a flashback, that can make a person feel unsafe. Because sometimes some abusers will use colors, smells, sounds, sound waves especially, in their programming and in the trauma.
You said a sound wave specifically.
Harmonics.
That is really interesting. What how would you describe that? Could you give an example of that?
Yeah, well, harmonics is used a lot of times to alter brainwaves. And when a person, a child or an adult is being programmed or they're being traumatized, they can use harmonics to alter brainwaves to put in messages, programming of any kind. And some of the programming is callback dates. Upon remembering, you're going to forget. Things like that when given a certain cue or trigger, will pull that message forward. So then they'll remember that and be compliant. There's a lot of different ways, a lot of different brain waves that they work with.
I want to come back to that, because it's a very, very important area to go down. But
Okay.
Could you give me, we just spoke about it before the show, where you were going to the definition of abuse and then the definition of satanic ritual abuse, and this is profoundly important.
Okay. Just a second here. Ritual abuse is an extreme sadistic form of abuse of children and non-consensual adults. It is methodical, systematic, sexual, physical, emotional, and spiritual abuse, which often includes mind control, torture, and highly illegal and immoral activities such as murder, child pornography, prostitution, or trafficking. The abuse is justified by a religious or political ideology Satanic ritual abuse, or SRA, is the abuse of a helpless person, most often a child, in rituals performed in the worship of Satan. These rituals are reported by survivors, include physical violence, sexual violation, molestations, and emotional mental trauma, forcing the subject to watch violent and participate in disturbing acts.
So we've talked about when you said getting involved 30 to 35 years ago, and there is a point to this. Can you lay out what then drew you to that? What were you doing at that time? What did you begin to notice that drew you into this ministry?
To be honest with you, Mark, I had no idea. I was not looking for this. And I just believe that it was God that directed my steps because, like I said, I was working with an organization while I was going to school to get my degrees. Excuse me, as part of an internship. We networked across the United States with other organizations that were doing basically the same thing, coming up with the same conclusions about the youth being involved in all these satanic activities. And also, too, Mike Warnicki Ministries back then was huge. And Mike was inundated with all these kids, nowhere to go. So he started giving referrals to our organization. And it got to the point that where some of them needed to be safe homed, and some of them needed to be taken and to a place or taken underground so they could never be found again because there were so many contracts on their lives, and they're for leaving and for talking. And so that led to, once I got my degree, I thought, well, I was still partially involved with the group, but things had kind of settled down, and the Satanic Panic started, which was nullifying a lot of the survivors' stories that was happening. And the Satanic Panic was a thing that just started to stop people from talking, to stop survivors from talking, because nobody would ever believe them. But when you talk to somebody from Missouri or from California that don't know each other, they're telling you the same stories as a child. It's true. I believe children when they say, Mommy touched me, or my daddy touched me, or this man came, because children don't lie.
I hear. What? Sorry, just for the audience, and this is really important. What is your degree? What are your qualifications in?
Okay, I am a licensed clinical pastoral counselor. I am ordained as well as a therapist. I have a doctorate in philosophy as well as in psychology. I have 2 different doctorates.
Right. It's very interesting because on my recent trip to the US, we walked into a local bookshop, which shall be named nameless. What was astounding to me was the amount of Harry Potter books that were in that bookshop, and also a particular art form, which is Japanese type art form, which I've just forgotten. And it was the titles on there that I just found very demonic, right? Let alone some of the pushing politically, which I found very Marxist. So anyone watching this, please kindly go in your local bookshop and just look at what is available to us, to young people, and what's being pushed.
Right.
But so when you've just used that word, the satanic panic, and you used a very, very important couple of words where you said that it nullified young people's experience, which we wouldn't wish on any of them. And as you've said, and knowing a little bit about the geography of America, when you're talking about Missouri and you're talking about California, they are a long way away from each other, thousands of miles. So can you date this? Was this in the 80s? Was this in the 90s? Talk about, excuse me, kindly talk about that and the build up to it. And then this phrase, satanic panic, and where did this come from?
The Satanic Panic came, excuse me, from news media. You know, when you had shows like Oprah or Geraldo that were having guests on there talking about their stories, they sensationalized a lot of that. And then you have a group of people that are trying to nullify it, to prove that they're wrong, that this really doesn't happen in America, and that so that created fear and created a lot of the panic. And so people just didn't believe that there was such a thing, didn't believe that music has such a strong influence on teenagers' minds as well as adults. It's very influential, it's very spiritual, you know. So it caused a lot of fear that happened back in the 80s, early 90s. And then things kind of settled down. Satanism never went away. It just kind of went underground for a little bit, so nobody heard about it until survivors started coming out and talking about what happened to them.
Because Oprah Winfrey had, is it Aquino on? Mm-hmm. You know, the Church of Satan or the Church of Set. So
yeah, Temple of Set.
Temple of Set. So he had, she had Aquino on, didn't she?
Yes, and right. His wife Lilith.
Yep. And could you? I know it may seem obvious. Could you describe what Aquino was into, and what was he had a job, didn't he? Which is rather interesting.
Yes, he did. Aquino was in charge of the record center in Missouri as well as in California, and he developed a program along with another gentleman of psychological warfare, mind control, which they experimented on a lot of our soldiers, creating a dual personality, basically a delta or an assassin personality. You know, so they extended it even farther when with people, you know, like survivors, like victims that are in, you know, the Satanism. And I need to say that a lot of the people that I've worked with grew up in the family of Satanists, but there's a lot of them that did not. They just were kidnapped and trafficked into that. And so, but the mind control and psychological warfare that they put them through changed their personalities, created personalities, you know, for different obvious jobs and stuff that the personalities were designed for.
So is this where the whole phrase plus the operation MK Ultra comes from? In regards
MK Ultra comes from a paperclip. It comes from all of the government subtypes and stuff like that. There's like 169 different subtypes of MK Ultra. And mostly with MK Ultra, they usually start with early on in a child, grooming them, torturing them, causing splits in the personality, and through the abuse and stuff like that. And so then they'll also create specific personalities for specific things, you know, like, but using them on brain waves, like the alpha brainwave or the beta brainwave. There's created as sexual alters that can go in to different places, seduce senators, seduce whatever their assignment is, glean information, report back to whoever their handler is.
And what, because this whole thing of, could you say that about splitting the mind? What, how young are these children? Would they be, and when do you reach that limit where you? I mean, it sounds awful. It sounds awful way to describe it, but because it is so horrendous. But how old? Where is the cutoff in regard to the age of children in
As
being able
long
to split their minds?
as long as they are in and being handled, they can create a personality at any age level because the foundation is generally sometimes pre-birth in utero, and or once the baby is a baby, like 8 or 9 months, they'll start with electrodes. They'll start traumatizing the baby to start some of the splitting. A lot of times, what they'll do is they'll put electrodes to shut off part of the brain to feed information into the brain, and the babies can record that because the brain is so open and it can record anything at that age. That's how children start learning. But most of the abuse starts right around 2, and it can continue for a lifetime. But when you have an ordinary child that has not been subjected to this stuff, when they have domestic violence, they can create personalities themselves for protection. And that usually starts at an early age, but cutoff is usually about the age of accountability, about 7, 8, or 9. Doesn't develop, after that. But if they are being mind controlled and programmed in these groups, that can continue.
When you say the age of 2, from your experience, then describing the development of a child at the age of 2, why that particular age?
Well, like I said, they can start earlier than that, but 2 is usually when a child is learning different what attachments, and they teach them how to not to attach to their primary caretaker, and so they can start at that age. It's easier to get them to develop the programs and stuff.
So, as we said, you wonderfully described, you're talking about what was happening in Missouri, what was happening in California, and then what was happening in many cases around America then. And you have, when you're talking about electrodes, when you're talking about 2-year-old, etc., you are talking about observations that you have made personally, or the cases that you've had to deal with. How was that described to you?
It was described during doing memory work with clients. It's interesting when generally a person who has been mind controlled, they have what is called an internal world inside their head for the majority, and they put like a landscape because it brings more order to chaos. Otherwise, the mind is just going constantly, the constant talking that's on the inside. They create homes for these personalities to live in, different jobs, functions, and stuff. Anyway, I'm sorry, I think I diverted from your question.
No, not at all. We were just you were just talked about a young, like 8, 9
Right.
Month baby, electrodes. You talked about a 2-year-old is where
Right.
they would really start this working hard to split the personality. And I was asking you, in saying that they are observations that you have made through some of the children
Right.
that you have tried to help. Is that fair enough?
A lot of the survivors that I've worked with, they share basically common themes. This is why I know a lot of what they're saying is accurate, because they'll describe in a memory, they'll describe the ritual. They'll describe placement of elements, the opening, the summonings, stuff like that. But then they'll also describe the programming. Sometimes they'll black out and not remember part of it, but then they can remember some of it, what I'm trying to say. And so there are certain elements and stuff that has to be done and for these people, to be programmed.
Mary Jo, what is there any specific events? I know I've said this earlier, but was there any particular event that suddenly, do you think, led up to the fact that you and others, and we have another mutual friend, suddenly opening themselves up to, we've got to investigate this. There is something going on here. Can you date that at all? Can you give an example and think this is what was changing in American society?
Well, I remember back, it was about 1991 or 2, somewhere in there. I had a client that was sharing a memory with me where she had been taken from the hospital, taken underground, and transported about 30 miles underground to a ritual site and then brought back. And so I had heard our mutual friend was on the radio and talking, and he had talked about the tunnels in his area. So I decided to give him a call, and so that's how we connected. But then I also found out he did investigations. So that's how I kind of got interested in this, to try to find out deeper what is really going on. And as I did research, and as I heard like a lot of the memories and that, I started connecting the dots about this is much bigger than what the news is trying to say, which they weren't saying anything, and much bigger than what we ever thought it would be, and how high up it went.
And unfortunately, it to you, it would have seemed this is far bigger than I would have thought at all. And I'm not necessarily, we go down that road and discuss this, but when you turn around and say how high up it goes, and we end up thinking of the Franklin case as a very good example. And I don't say this lightly, because at this point, Mary Jo, how much of a pushback were you getting? Because then that leads into the whole satanic panic definition.
Yeah.
How much of a pushback were you starting to get? Was it difficult for you in regard to your training to think, well, hold on a minute, this young person has just told me that they were taken underground for 30 miles. How was this difficult for you to compute, to understand, to get to a point of saying, I believe this? Sorry, that's a bit of a mouthful, but
No, it wasn't. By that time, I had already been working with survivors. The very first adult one I received was like in 1990, actually, and had no idea what I was doing at that point when it came to something like this, of this magnitude. And I had no idea she had multiple personalities. All I knew that she had been molested. And so after her talking, she talked to me and was telling me that her father used to traffic her every weekend. And so listening to these stories, I started believing, because what she was saying, how you just get it in your gut.
Yep.
And I listened to what that tells me. And so it was just that deep knowing she's telling the truth and she needs help. And how do I help her? She was afraid to go to the police in her town because she was from out of state, because her dad was influential and nobody would have believed her. So we had to start building a case little by little, in my office. But, and I had people that was telling me you shouldn't be dabbling in that kind of stuff because that stuff really doesn't exist, and that's just in the movies and all that kind of stuff. And that came from church, the church I was at that time.
I'm sorry. Right.
And that's so, but anyway, I did find people with support, and people that had some similar experiences. And so, like I said in the beginning, the organization that I was doing my internship with was a great support because they knew what was going on. So that helped me. So I had a place where I could go and say, "Hey, this is what's happening,"
Mm.
And they fortunately had private investigators. And one case we had of a lady, and that came from out of state through a ministry in St. Louis. She had contacted them, and they contacted me, and so I went to the airport and picked them up, her and her daughter, and we didn't have a safe place for them to go, but we found a place for them to stay. And she had discovered that her daughter was being ritual abused and taken out by her dad at nighttime. And the daughter had given her like sleeping powder or medicine in her tea at night. And the mother would just sleep through. And so had no idea that the little girl was gone and got back in the morning. But long story short, we had her at a safe place. The organization found out where they were at, traced them. And so we had to move them. And we had, fortunately, a private investigator that could move her to another state and take her underground, give them new identity and a place to stay, all the information that they needed to be able to get a job and stuff. And also for the little girl to get continued help.
Mary Jo, how this isn't a frivolous question. It's a very important question, I think. How do you tell the difference between what is real and what is not real? And you made a reference to how you feel in your gut. And of course, you may end up saying it's through experience. But it is difficult because we've all been hoodwinked at various times in our life, if we're honest. Mm-hmm. So how do you tell that, the difference between what is real and what isn't?
I test them. I have two tests that I use that test for dissociation, because I've had people sit there and act like they're dissociating, and you can kind of tell it's not really real. And that, because there's a difference when somebody really checks out and when they're kind of faking it.
What do you mean by, could you define what you mean by, sorry to interrupt, by disassociation?
Dissociation is a coping mechanism that a child learns early on to mentally and emotionally. And what happens is they recede inward, and all of their senses go numb and they fade back. So they're not aware of what's going on the outside or what's happening to them. And eventually they will come forward. Now, if they've got another personality, that personality usually will come forward and take the abuse, because that one is the hero or a tough guy or somebody like that can take being hurt, while the other one is being protected. But when I call them wannabes. Now, please hear my heart when I say this. I figure something has had to happen to that person to make them think that they might have been ritually abused. There's some trauma in their life. And that my job is to help them sort through that to figure out what it really is. But I have a clinical diagnosis or test that we do with everybody, because I need to see how dissociative they can be.
And
And
are
I
you
also,
there?
I
Sorry.
also, when they have memories, I also listen for certain details. And if I don't hear them, I'll question. And not to shame them or to challenge them or anything, but to get them to kind of look at what they're actually thinking they're seeing.
And in your professional practice, in your professional situation, are you then, you found yourself sitting opposite a client, using that word, and you're counting how many multiple personalities that they actually have? What's the, I don't mean this frivolously again, but what's the most sort of multiple personalities someone
That's
has
hard to
had
say.
in your experience?
That's hard to say. If they, especially if they're MK Ultra, they're
Right.
what we call polyfragmented, which means there could be hundreds. And
Wow.
not everyone is a personality. A personality has its own true identity. Fragments are parts of the different personalities, and they hold memories. And generally, once they tell their story or receive healing from that, they integrate into the personality. So we don't see them that anymore. So I try to work to get to the actual personality systems versus just trying to work with all these fragments and stuff, because it's endless.
When we were just talking a minute ago, when you said about, I asked about the pushback because I want to talk about that as well. When you said you had pushback within the church, sadly, that you were attending at that time, asking a naive question, why do you think people were pushing against you? Why would they not face what you were dealing with on a professional level?
I think a lot of people, and Christians included, don't want to believe that people can be that vile, that evil. That they would worship Satan. And I think some of it is a coping mechanism called denial.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, because it's hard to face the truth, to even imagine or comprehend that this is actually going on. Like our children that are being trafficked, a lot of people think, oh, that's over there in those countries. No, it's in our neighborhoods. It's everywhere if you really look at it.
Did you, with the cases that you were dealing with, did they ever have an international reach? Did you end up tracking international other countries that were impinging sadly on their experience?
I think I remember having one case, I think, that was international. That was over here.
Right.
I've worked with quite a few people from out of state, but this one particular, for it was just for a season.
So that then took you from another country or another country that had come into America with their experience.
I'm sorry, didn't understand.
Sorry. So was that was impeding on another country, Mary Jo, or was it another country that was then coming into America?
It was a person coming into. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Coming into America.
Right.
I didn't work with them out of the country.
So if we go back to 1990, 1991, 1992, and there was all this activity sadly going on. And as you said, you go back to the Oprah Winfrey interview. We've referred to Aquino, etc. And there he was in that infamous interview with his wife. When did this whole phrase satanic panic really start to come up? Did it come from, as you said, it came from interviews like that? Where else did it come from, and what did it do for yourself and others who are really trying to fight against this and expose it?
There was an organization, I don't know if I can
Don't,
name
don't. That's fine.
and that, thank you. There was a big organization that this particular couple came out against, even though they had written a couple books about Satanism and about kids getting involved in that. They came out against people like Lauren Stafford and some of the other survivors that had given their testimony openly. They came up against Mike Warnicki Ministries and all that kind of stuff. And
who were they? Sorry, I do apologize. Who, you've just named two people. Who were they?
Lauren Stafford is now passed, and I knew her, and our friend knew her very well. And she was a survivor of ritual abuse. She wrote a book exposing her journey and stuff. And there was another book that was written, Michelle Remembers. Well, the media and all that just tore all those books apart, saying that these people were fake, that this really didn't happen, that they were making everything up. And so this is how a lot of the satanic panic started. And so anytime a survivor would come out, they would be afraid that they were going to be humiliated by these organizations, because these organizations went right after every one of the survivors and just completely just shamed them.
Has anyone we won't name the organization, but has anyone investigated that organization, and as that phrase said, followed the money? Has anyone actually done that?
Yeah, well, that organization isn't
functioning anymore.
Correct. Thank you for that. Yeah, no, they dissolved back in about 2019.
So that organization was going after these two who wrote their books?
They were going after any particular survivor that had written a book, that had publicly given their testimony.
Are you able in any way to say what the motivation of this organization was? Was it fairly blatant in the way it was dismissing these cases, or was it trying to do it softly?
They were blatant in attacking the survivors and saying that they were making false claims, that none of this really happened. You know, they were come after them like a vengeance. It was not good.
I suppose what I'm, without putting any of us in an awkward position, I'm just trying to drill down to say, what is their motivation for doing that? Because at the end of the day, if young children are going through these awful things, then any normal person would want to see restitution there, would want to see healing for these children, and would want to warn other people about what was going on. Sorry.
You would think that would be the case, but my speculation, and this is me, and I think I know a couple other people that would agree with it, that I think they had stuff to hide.
Right.
You know, that there was stuff in their background that could have come back on them. With that, yeah, I know that the organization, like I said, the people that ran it, that both are deceased now, and the organization is no more. But I believe the wife had occult history herself.
Right. But that's rather interesting, isn't it? Because about, as you say, certain behavior, trying to cover that up, instead of very sadly seeing them come to what they've been through. So it seems that this particular organization, when you're describing the lady there, that also they had trauma, and it always comes back to that trauma in their background. It's just very sadly it's come out in a very deceitful, wanting to cover it up way. So you're referring to two people writing books. There'll be other people that have come out, and then you talked about tests that you can do to say, I'm now trying to find out whether what this person's saying is true or not. Is suddenly, have we reached a point again where it seems safe, and I don't want to put words in your mouth or anyone else, but it seems safe again, or is really important that we get to the truth of this and that we expose it? Does it seem a safe environment to begin to do that again?
I don't think it's safe. I believe this stuff is so it's global. You know, and the danger, the threats, everything is still just as much today as it was back then. It was nothing for us to get phone calls threatening our families and threatening animals, or to find animal, carcasses on doorsteps and stuff back then.
How do I'm not asking this question to be dramatic. I think it just says the importance of it. How often did that happen to you personally and to other people that you knew?
I would say, to me, it happened a couple of times, like dead carcasses hung up by the neck, gutted, those kinds of things. To the organization, it was almost a weekly thing. It got to the point that they would say, well, what roadkill do we have today? They would start making jokes about it.
Right. So I referred to the fact that I went into a bookshop and it was really just observing what was on the shelves, what is influencing young people. And there was a recent meme that I saw where it described this guy as saying, I'm a Christian, I'm working in an office, and that the people I'm working with, they freely talk about the occult in such a free way. They turn around and go, well, if you then engage with me in some particular satanic game, whether even basic things, of course, starting from a Ouija board or whatever, maybe that'll help you at work. And you've talked about this, where culturally you've seen America, all of this more and more come in to the United States. How do we, Mary Jo, how do we educate the church on these things? Ephesians 6 says we're not fighting flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. This is a spiritual war. How do we educate the church on these issues?
We need to have conferences. We need to have people that are equipped, that, that can help train churches and leadership to be able to help people, so people feel safe coming in, so they're not judged. Because this is a recovery is a long process for many survivors of trauma, because you don't heal that fast. Some of them are 15, 20 years, and some never fully recover. So we need to have more education. We're having a conference hopefully in September, but so far it doesn't seem like a whole lot of people are interested in it yet. But
right.
In that, so it just really boggles my mind. Why don't you want to help people?
Why do you think? I mean, of course, it's happening in other countries. It's happening around the world. But having had discussions with various people in the US, why do you think there's such a prevalence of this within the United States? And I'm not maybe some people think, oh, this is a sexy subject to talk about. It's not. It's an awful thing to talk about because of the reality and how it affects people. But why does so much of this, do you think, goes on in the United States of America?
Because there's not enough people that'll stand up and say enough is enough. Not enough people. Spiritual warfare is not being taught in churches. I can't begin to tell you how many couples I talk to in counseling, and I ask them, do you understand that you're up against spirits, and that's causing division, that's causing a lot of trouble in your family, and they'll look at me like, what are you talking about? People don't know how to do spiritual warfare, and I've got a library like crazy, so I'll lend some of these books out trying to help husbands to take that stand, to be the spiritual authority in the house. But they're not being taught in the pulpit that there's an enemy out there that hates you and that's going to take your soul if you let them. And we can't stand before God and say, well, I didn't know that there wasn't that was a real devil. I just thought it was fantasy. We can't do that. I mean, we need to get the gospel of Jesus Christ out, get people saved, and let the Holy Spirit work in their lives, because that's where healing comes, is when people are saved. I can't begin to tell you how many times I've heard stories from my clients saying, Jesus appeared to me when I thought I was going to die. He appeared to me, told me to hang on, that he didn't leave me. So many stories about how God and his angels were there.
Mary Jo, we've just got the last few minutes, but there's one question, and I hope that we can do this again. How have you come across where you've talked about children, and you'll do a test on a child to work out, or maybe slightly older teenagers, whatever, to work out the split personalities, work out if people are telling the truth or not. What happens if, have you had to deal with adults, say 35, 40 years of age, and you're trying to work out whether they're telling the truth or not? There's some traumatic event that's gone in their life. How do you deal with that? How do you discern that?
Well, like I said, there's there's clinical tests for dissociation that you can give them. It's a questionnaire, and if they're honest about it, it can show the scale on whether they are dissociative or not. If they have been ritually abused, they're going to be dissociative. Okay, that's a given, because I don't believe anybody can witness what actually goes on in a ritual and have a sound mind coming out of that.
Right.
So there's key elements there. And then I'll start asking, if I don't see if they're not dissociative, then I'll ask them to tell me about some of their memories. Usually their memories are just sexual in nature, and it doesn't talk about the ritual, the beginning and the ending and all that kind of stuff. Because if they don't talk about the conjuring circles or anything that is prevalent in the ritual but if they're a true survivor, they're going to talk about things that go on.
So if I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if they don't go into the detail, then you're questioning whether they've had those experiences anyway.
Yeah, I'll ask them about it and that, but then I'll also do other digging, asking other questions about their childhood history, about relationships, about other stuff, because sometimes there could be, if they drugs could play a role in it, and if you're high or if you're not there and you're watching a scary movie that might have an element of that in there that could be in your memory. because memory is stored. And a lot of times when we sleep, those memories come up.
I hear.
And they
I
could
hear.
think that happened to them, when in essence it was just something else that they saw.
Mary Jo, I'm going to bring it to a close, and I'm not saying that you may. Well, I'll ask this: where can people find your work if they need to find your work? Where can people find you, or that may just be word of mouth? I'll just leave you to answer that.
Okay, I have a website, southcountychristiancounseling.com.
Right.
They
South
can go.
County.
They can go on the website. There's a link there that they can email me if need be.
Right. Right. Okay. Well, brilliant. Well, Mary Jo, what I need to do, I'll if you send me that, and I'll make sure that is in the show notes below. I just want to thank you so much for your time. It's been a really fascinating conversation that I think needs to continue.
Well, thank you.
No, because that whole phrase of the satanic panic and how it has then covered up something which is actually sadly extremely real, and we have to be aware of that wherever we are around the world. Mary Jo, I'm going to play us out. Please don't disappear, and I'll say goodbye to you on the other side, but to say thank you to everyone for listening, watching. When this is out there, please like, subscribe, and please share it. So thank you so much for your time. I'll play us out. Thank you.